In this module, we're going to begin our discussion of mise en place, what it means and what it means for you. The objectives for this module are: create and use a prep list, measure and prepare items needed prior to cooking, identify and gather the tools and equipment necessary to prepare a recipe properly or work a station efficiently, prepare and apply various flavorings or seasoning mixtures to food before they are cooked, and set up and apply the standard breading procedure. The word mise en place is a French term which means to put into place or everything in its place. This is not just an idea of having your ingredients available, but is also a state of mind. This refers to organizing and planning your work, gathering and preparing your ingredients, and assembling your tools and equipment. And of course, your state of mind and how effectively you are going to be whenever you're gathering your equipment, whenever you're preparing your ingredients, how efficient you have everything set up is going to play a big factor in how successful you are in the end. A prep list can take many different forms. It could be a formalized printed document that doesn't have to be anything other than a waiver too much from the day-to-day operations or from the week-to-week operations, or it can be a napkin with just a few jotted down notes. In either case, it's meant to keep the cook and chef on track and make sure that no details are left out. Once the cooking begins, there is no time to run to the walk-in cooler. The prep list is a blueprint for how food production is going to be achieved during the workday. An overview of what needs to be done and how long it's going to take to do it as well. The order in which assignments should be completed is also taken into consideration. And how to cook each item and how each cook may interact with each other in the kitchen as well.
What's up, folks? Are you writing your prep list to get the most out of your day? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Mike Tyson. In this video, I want to give you some tips with your own daily plan that you can use to get more higher quality work done faster. I'm going to share with you not just a prep list I wrote, but one that I wrote and then got punched in the face with. And then I want to share how I would rewrite it to maximize my kitchen productivity. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Justin Khanna. I'm a chef taking all my experience in fine dining restaurants all over the world and distilling it down into these videos to help you progress your career. If you're into that, consider subscribing and hit that notification bell so you can get a heads up every single week, because that's how often you can count on me to make new videos. So if you're new here or you don't know, I live in Seattle. Me and my small team at Mixed Projects do one night only dinner events. They are usually tasting menu and format between 7 and 12 courses. I'm testing and cooking and getting to know new people in this new city. But we had a dinner event last Saturday and something horrible happened. We fell behind. Now, I'll spare any specific details. The guests surprisingly didn't notice anything. Everyone left super happy, and we did manage to execute on some pretty awesome food. But we were sweating, and it was a lack of preparation and organization, a lot on the part of the prep list, that I contribute to a lot of those problems happening. So I want to show you exactly what I did, how I would fix it if we were doing the event again, and then hopefully you can use some of that information to help your own productivity at work. Yeah, I crumpled it up and I threw it away. But then I was thinking, I was like, well, this is a great opportunity. So I took it and I digitized it so it's a little bit easier to read. So my prep list usually follows a pretty specific format, and you can see mine up there is split up into different boxes, and each box corresponds with a different dish. Here we had snacks, soup, bread, cabbage, char, broccoli, pork, cheese, dessert, coffee. Pretty straightforward, right? For this dinner, we had 9 people at the counter. It was me and my other chef that I work with, Hubert, cooking the dinner. If some of those boxes seem that they're blank, it's because some of that, we went through a meeting. We had a discussion of this was my responsibility, this is your responsibility. So we both had our respective prep lists, and I had everything I needed on my list. And here's the first tip I want to give you folks: be specific. You can see down on the broccoli dish, we were planning on doing cuts of broccoli and then charring it to bring out that toasted, nutty brassica flavor. But notice I didn't just write broccoli on my prep list. Why? To get a bird's eye view. Because it's easy to write a prep list of just dishes, right? That prep list of mine would just be 8 things on it, and I'd be like, okay, yeah, I got this. But then if you break it down into its individual components, you maybe have like 20 to 50 items on that list, and then you're like, whoa. And then if you take those elements and break them down even further, then you start to get a view for what your list actually is. For example, I won't just write fish on my prep list, I will write clean fish, seasoned fish, portion fish. If you have a sauce, for example, I would write start sauce, strain sauce, finish sauce. And this does 2 things. It gives you the super satisfying feeling of crossing things off of the list all day long. That gives you momentum, keeps you going. It also gives you, like I said before, that bird's eye, so you can see in advance when things are starting to go south and when you can take that opportunity to ask for help. For me, I know that I should have taken this prep list and added 2 more boxes, one with wine and one with service, because I was also responsible for gathering all the plateware and serviceware and napkins. We also did wine pairings with this dinner, so I had to make sure all the wines were properly chilled, we had all of our glassware ready to go, and all of the table settings were set. And I didn't write that on my prep list, and all the time that I took away from this prep list to do those projects, that took away from me getting this stuff done. And that's definitely one of the reasons why I fell behind. Man, admitting your problems to the internet is not easy, but we are real AF on this channel. All right, you got all your stuff laid out, it's listed and organized, you're ready to start prepping, right? Wrong. You need to prioritize so you can get into a flow. You know that feeling you get when you're multitasking, when you've got 4 pots on the stove and 2 trays in the oven and a knife cuts project on your board? That's effective prepping, and I'm gonna show you how to do that. I go through while I have this bird's eye view of my prep list, and I ask myself 2 questions. What can I automate? And what am I afraid of? And this is super important. Shout out to Tim Ferriss for the whole automation thing. So I asked myself, which one of these projects can work while I do something else? This means starting your stocks, purees where the vegetables need to cook, chips that need to dehydrate, oven baked projects, etc. So I go ahead and put a 1 next to all of these items. Boom. Now for the second part, remember we asked what we were afraid of? When I was a sous chef, this was a huge mistake I would see beginning chef de parties make when they went from prep cook to having their own station. And it's definitely a mistake I made on my first few stations as well. It's easy to do the easy stuff first. So picking herbs, all those tiny knife cuts projects, it feels good to get stuff done when you start your day. What's really hard is to ask yourself, what on this list freaks me out? That's what you need to do first. I'll frequently check in with myself while I'm prepping, and then if in the back of my head I'm like, oh shit, I still need to clean the crab, I will make sure that whatever I'm doing, I finish it, and the crab is exactly what I do next. Time is the asset, and you gotta make sure you take those intimidating projects down while you have time on your side. That'll also put you in a clean headspace so that if and when things do go wrong, you don't have scary things stacking on top of each other. So I'll go ahead and put a 1 next to all of those items as well. Boom, you're well on your way. Next up, I'll go ahead and flip it. I'll take a look at those last priority projects. What can wait or what has to wait until the absolute last minute? This includes a la minute knife cuts, picking herbs, slicing things that are gonna oxidize, and things like making pomme puree. Things that if you did right now, hours before the service started, they would look like shit by the time that time came around. Those you take and go ahead and put a 3 next to them. Now you can probably guess the next step. You go ahead and take everything else and put a 2 next to it. And now you're ready to go. The 2s don't get started until all the 1s are done. The 3s don't get started until all the 2s are done. And you can see all of it in a bird's eye kind of format. Now, if you're crushing it and you're always set up, that's awesome. Maybe you won't use anything that I said in this video, but if you ever find yourself behind or feeling unorganized or struggling to be there when service starts, I hope this is some really tactical advice that will help at least one of you. And I'm super aware that the first time you write a prep list is absolutely different than the second time you write a prep list, because the first time you write it, you're pulling from all your past experience as a chef. And then the second time, it's always comparing yesterday to today. So I know it's always different. And it's important to constantly rewrite and evaluate your performance and do a post-game analysis. Now, for all of you that are in smaller teams, or maybe you want to digitize your prep list with your station partner, a little hack that we use at Mix Projects is using an app called Trello. It's fantastic for creating lists. It syncs across all my devices. I can share it with specific people. We can set deadlines, and it's all super organized by event. and we'll break it up into different cards. We do it by dish, so each dish gets its own checklist, and we can see by a percentage how close we are to 100% being all the way set up. It's a really solid tool we use to make sure everyone's on the same page. Not being paid at all by Trello to say any of this. It's just a tool that if you're planning events with teams, we found it really effective, even way more effective than this bad boy. We do have another event on Sunday. I'm super pumped for it. We actually had a meeting just yesterday to get all of those critical preparations squared away. I feel super confident and satisfied that everything is laid out in our Trello sheets ready to go. I will no doubt be making another paper list to see it from a bird's eye. I don't always like pulling out my phone and checking what I have left to do. I will cross-reference this with all of the Trello sheets, and we can look forward to another successful dinner. If you like this video, gently touch that like button. It's not gonna bite you. To see more videos like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on that notification bell so you can get a heads up. I go live quite a bit on this channel. I've also linked up a video you might like to watch next in this general vicinity. Shout also goes out to Amanda, Kai, Lorraine, Connor, Henrique, Alberto, Paulina, and Patrick, all for supporting me and what I'm building on Patreon. If you're not on that platform, you should definitely check it out. Links in the description. My name's Justin Khanna. Have a good one.
So let's discuss key takeaways from that. The first key takeaway that I come up with is be specific. When you're thinking about how to do your prep list, be specific in what you say. Are you just going to put on there apples, or are you going to be specific with what you want with it? Assume that the person that's picking up that prep list has never seen or heard anything about what you're doing, and give them instructions verbally or written down. So for instance, the apples, make sure you tell them, peel the apples, core the apples, slice the apples. The second thing is prioritize. It's super important to prioritize your work. The last thing you want to do is get to the last second and all of a sudden you don't have time to get anything done. Ask yourself, what can I automate? What are things that can be done ahead of time? What are things that I can pass on to someone else? What is it I'm afraid to do? If I do those things that freak me out first, then I'm going to have more comfortable situations down the road. The last thing I want to do is do the freak out stuff right before the food is about to go out the door. And then what can I wait to do to the last minute? Is there something that needs to be done at the last minute? For instance, a chiffonade of basil. Basil is a very delicate herb, and after a while it will start to brown. So you really don't want to chiffonade that too far in advance. The third thing is use technology. I'm a big advocate of technology in many different cases, and also sometimes I do like to check off things on a checklist. So using Trello boards is a great way of being able to do a prep list without having a bunch of different paper lying around. Not only that, you can share it and everybody on your team knows exactly what's going on at any one given time. So there are some key ways to think about it when you think about writing a prep list. A prep list is not just a rewriting of the recipes. You want to make sure that it's more detailed than that, and it's going to be ordered in the way that you need things to be ordered. Also, it's going to include quantities. It's a reading through recipes and composing a written map of how to accomplish these tasks necessary to prepare the recipes. The first step in organizing your work is to read and understand the recipes you will be using. This is key, and oftentimes people skip this step. Not only is it the recipe a list of ingredients that you'll need and the quantities of which you'll need them in, but also it is the methods involved. And once you have the method and understanding of those methods involved, you can also put into practice things like what kind of pot or what kind of pan, what kind of spoon, whisk, or ladle you'll need for that recipe. Once each item is identified and quantified, the next step is to schedule your tasks through prioritization. You always want to start, just like the video says, start with those things that freak you out first, get those out of the way, and leave your simple, easy, quick to execute tasks toward the end. Here's a very simple example of a prep list. This includes the salad station that it's going to be made on. So this is for a particular cook. It's got the quantity that they'll need for that as well. So you can easily go in here and say something that might take you a longer period of time, such as cook and chill eggs for curried egg salad. You know you can't make the egg salad until you cook and chill the eggs. So when you're thinking about creating a par list or a you have to first understand what par is. So determining what and how much of an item to prepare is critical for efficient mise en place. So we use this term par. Par is the standard amount that should always be on hand. For example, 15 orders of London broil or 1 pint of marinade. In the restaurant industry, one of the most popular dressings in the South is ranch dressing, and you're going to have a lot of it on hand. My par level for ranch dressing on a weekday was 4 gallons. On a weekend, it was 6 gallons. So you're going to have to take into consideration business as well. Prep list also accounts for the anticipation in that business. We want to make sure that we understand that a Monday night is not going to be the same as a Friday night. There are some things to think about when you select tools and equipment. The first thing is, and it's always going to be number one, all tools, equipment, and work surfaces must be cleaned and sanitized. Sanitation and safety is always going to be our number one priority. Knives should be honed and sharpened. You want to make sure that before your shift or before you execute anything that you're going to have a sharp knife. A dull knife is a dangerous knife. Measuring devices should be checked for accuracy periodically. Now, we're not saying you're going to have to check your measuring spoons for accuracy. They're pretty much going to be accurate all the time, but things such as weight scales can become off calibration. Thermometers can be off calibration as well. Ovens and cooking surfaces should be preheated if necessary. You want to make sure that you're not putting something into a cold oven because it can affect the rise of an item or it can affect the browning of an item. The only time you want to put something in a cold oven is if the recipe specifically calls for it. Mixing bowls and saucepans and storage containers should be the correct size for the task at hand. It doesn't make any sense to put 2 quarts of liquid in a 22-quart container and then put it in a walk-in cooler, because it's going to take up far much more room than what you'll actually need. Additionally, serving plates, cookware, utensils, hand tools, and other necessary smallwares should be gathered and stored nearby. If you need a ladle or if you need a spatula, the last thing you want to do is go scramble for it whenever you've got the food already starting to cook. Food should be gathered and stored conveniently at the proper temperature. If you're going to be cooking chicken, it's always a good idea to keep it on an ice bath or on bags of ice. You can use zip top bags with ice in it and keep it on top of it. Cold air sinks, so keeping the bags of ice on top of the chicken actually keeps it colder than putting ice on the bottom of it. Expiration dates on food should be checked periodically for validity. Now, you need to understand the difference between expiration dates, manufacturer's sell dates, manufacturer's best by dates. There are some variations in that, which we'll discuss in another chapter. Sanitizing solution, hand towels, disposable gloves, and trash receptacles should be kept conveniently located as well. You want to make sure that you have all that within hand's reach. When you're talking about weighing and measuring your ingredients, it's important that you understand there are a number of steps and procedures are commonly used in mise en place, and we're talking about weights and measures of all ingredients. Measure liquids in measuring cups. We want to measure small amounts of dry ingredients by overflowing measures and then leveling them off with the ingredients. So here's an example of how we would do that. We would fill the measuring spoon up. Measuring refers to the use of a cup or a spoon to determine the amount of dry or liquid ingredient. So we would fill this measuring spoon up and fill it all the way to the top, even overfilling it. And then we would take a flat surface, such as the back of our knife, and we would scrape the top of it. So we want to, whenever measuring small amounts of dry ingredients, by overfilling the appropriate measurement spoon and then leveling that ingredient. But it is really important to understand the difference on how you fill that spoon. Some things are packed tightly and some things are put in loosely, which we'll discuss in just a moment.
Hey everybody, this is Marie of Humblebee and Me, and today we're going to be looking at how to use a scale. So, I've got this little scale here. I got it on Amazon. It's quite inexpensive. It weighs down to 0.1 of a gram, which is a level of precision that's really nice when you're making body products, but not necessary for things like baking. And it goes up to 2 kilos, which is a nice top range for most of the things that we'll be working with. So to start with, you'll need a vessel to weigh, in this case, our beeswax into. So I've bought some of these in the past, and so these are cute little sort of silicone weigh boats. They're light and they're flexible. I find I don't actually like them that much though, because they are so light that they tend to float when you use them in a water bath, especially if you don't have much in there. And if you're using a fine powder, because the inside of these cups has just a little bit of texture to it, the fine powder tends to stick in there, and so you lose some of it. So I tend to use little glass measuring cups, or prep cups, which are really inexpensive at kitchen stores and easily available. So the first thing we're going to do here, turn our scale on. It'll register at 0 and in grams. You can cycle through using the mode button to choose ounces or pounds or kilos if you wanted to, but I'm a big fan of grams, so I'm going to leave it there. So we'll start by popping that on there, and the first thing we'll see, of course, is that it registers the weight of our sort of weigh boat. But we don't really care about the weight of this bowl, so we're going to hit the tare button to reset it to 0. So now we can start weighing out our ingredients. So I'm going to aim for 10 grams of beeswax. And as you can see, this beeswax is some that I hacked off of a larger block of beeswax with a knife, and so we've got lots of different sizes of pieces here. And so it would be really hard to accurately measure this beeswax out by volume. So that would be with a tablespoon or a teaspoon or something. So we're going to shoot for 10 grams here. All right. So there you have your 10 grams of beeswax. If you're going to add another ingredient, what you do is sort of hit the tare button again, reset it to 0, and add something else. Now, if you're new to weighing things out, or if you are really playing by the rules, you really should use a new weigh boat for every ingredient and then combine them. I, on the other hand, like to play fast and loose and generally measure everything into the same container and just be really careful, which is where these little guys come in really handy. So these are just disposable plastic pipettes. You can get them for just a couple cents a piece. And I'll use these to measure out my liquids, because then I can add them a drop at a time, and it's much easier to ignore the fact that you should be using different bowls for each ingredient. So I tend to label them here with a felt pen so that I know what each one is for, and then I'll use an elastic band and just attach this to the side of a bottle of oil so that it always sort of lives with the oil that it's used for measuring, and then just add drop by drop by drop until I get the amount of liquid oil that I want, or liquid anything. Alright, that's basically the gist of how to weigh things out. Now you're ready to dive into all of your DIY projects. Thanks for watching.
When preparing ingredients and preparing your prep list, always think about those ingredients that can be done in advance. You can do sometimes large quantities of these items and keep them as long as you are keeping them airtight and at the proper temperature. Things such as clarified butter, toasted nuts and spices making breadcrumbs, preparing bouquet garnis and sachets, marinating meats and poultry, preparing rubs and pastes, and steeping dry ingredients are all things that can be done in advance in order to speed up the process. There's several different ways which you can clarify butter, and we're going to discuss several of them here. First one is slowly warm the butter in a saucepan over low heat without boiling or agitation. You just want it to start to melt. As the butter melts, milk solids rise to the top as a foam, and the water sinks to the bottom. So what you'll end up with is this very distinct separation of layers. When the butter is completely melted, skim the milk solids from the top using a ladle or a spoon. Be very careful just to take the milk solids and not too much of the butter fat. When all the milk solids have been removed, ladle the butterfat into a clean saucepan, being careful to leave the water at the bottom of the pan. The clarified butter is now ready to use. You can also pour it through a sieve or a chinois or a coffee filter works good for this as well to clarify it even further.
Butter is so delicious, and its creamy goodness improves so many recipes. But if you've ever tried sautéing in butter, you know what high heat does. Butter burns, smokes, and ultimately turns black. Definitely not the results you want. Butter is a fat, but it also contains milk solids, which is the part that burns. If you remove the solids, you're left with clear golden yellow butter fat that gives your cooking a rich, buttery flavor. This is called clarified or drawn butter. To make 1 cup of clarified butter, start out with 1 1/4 cups of unsalted butter. Step 1. Melt the butter. Cut the butter into pieces and place in a small, heavy saucepan. Use a heavy-bottomed pan because a thin one will have hot spots that can burn the butter as it melts. And that's exactly what you are trying to avoid. Put the saucepan on your stovetop and turn the heat to low. Let the butter melt slowly without stirring it. Step 2. Separate the milk solids from the butter fat. As the butter melts, you can see it separate into 3 layers. The top layer is thin and foamy. This represents some of the milk solids. The middle layer is the clear golden butter fat. The bottom layer is made up of water and more milk solids. As the butter separates, skim off the white foam with a spoon. Save the milk solids to use later on hot popcorn, stirred into pancake batter, or over warm rice or oatmeal. When the butter has finished melting and no more foam rises to the top, remove the pan from the heat. Let it cool for about 5 minutes or so to let more solids settle to the bottom. Skim off any last bits of foam that float to the surface. Then slowly spoon or pour off the clear butterfat into a glass liquid measuring cup, being careful to leave as much of the solids behind as you can. Line a fine mesh strainer with several layers of cheesecloth and set it over a heat-proof container. Pour the warm butterfat through the cheesecloth to filter out any remaining milk solids. You can store your clarified butter in an airtight container in the fridge or freezer for several months. The butter fat will firm up when it chills, but it melts again easily. When using clarified butter in a recipe, measure it out tablespoon for tablespoon, the same way you would measure regular butter or oil. Clarified butter delivers all the buttery taste without the worry of burning. Enjoy! Toasting fresh raw nuts brings out their natural flavor and aroma. Whether it's almonds, walnuts, pecans, cashews, or pine nuts, toasting nuts in the oven or on the stovetop is easy. Always start with the freshest raw nuts and store nuts high in fat in the fridge or the freezer until you're ready to use them. Taste test one of the nuts before toasting. If the flavor is off, no amount of toasting will make it better. If the nut tastes fresh, you're ready to get toasting. Let's try the oven method first. Preheat your oven to 300 degrees Fahrenheit and move the oven rack to the middle position. Line a rimmed baking pan with aluminum foil and lay the raw shelled nuts in a single layer on the pan. Place the pan in the oven and keep a close eye on the toasting process so you don't burn the nuts. After about 5 minutes, remove the pan and stir the nuts around on the foil, turning them over so they'll toast evenly on all sides. Look for signs of doneness, like nuts turning golden brown or smelling warm and toasty. When the nuts are toasted, slide them off the pan and into a bowl to stop the cooking. Now, let's try the stovetop method. Heat a large dry skillet over medium-low heat. Lay the raw shelled nuts in a single layer in the skillet. Stir the nuts continuously until they're beautifully browned and fragrant. Remove them from the skillet immediately so they don't get scorched. It's that easy. If your recipe calls for chopped nuts, make sure they're completely cool before you chop. Otherwise, they'll turn into a greasy mess. Hazelnuts are a great choice for toasting, but they're often sold with their thin, papery skin still on. Toasting them will actually help remove the skin. Toast them in the oven or on the stovetop until the skins start to blister. Then wrap them up in a clean kitchen towel and let them steam for about 10 minutes. Then rub them together in the towel so the friction loosens and removes the skins. Don't worry if a little skin is left behind, it won't affect your recipe. Boost the flavor for any recipe that calls for nuts by toasting them. Everything from desserts and sauces to savory dishes will all taste nuttier and better when you take a little time to toast the nuts.
A bouquet garni and a sachet are used to introduce flavoring, seasoning, and aromatics into stocks, sauces, soups, and stews. This is a selection of herbs, usually fresh, and vegetables tied into a bundle with twine. A standard bouquet garni consists of things such as parsley stems, celery, thyme, leeks, and carrots. But you can also use various other different ingredients there as well, such as adding bay leaf or fresh laurel leaf to it. Maybe a clove or two of garlic tied up in with it as well. A sachet or a sachet de piece is made by tying seasonings together in cheesecloth. A standard sachet consists of peppercorns, bay leaf, parsley stems, thyme, cloves, and optionally garlic. What makes this different from a bouquet garni is that these are usually ingredients that necessarily would fall out of the bouquet garni, such as the peppercorn or the thyme, peeled thyme, or the maybe you might put it in cloves. These things would not normally sit between the pieces of the sandwich bouquet garni. Sachet de piece means a sachet or purse of spices. A brine is a liquid, usually consisting of salt, sugar, and flavoring components, that is designed to help the food not only flavor, but retain liquid and moisture as well. Brines used on meat such as ham and bacon, which are going to be smoked before using. Soaking in brine preserves the moisture retention of the meat. And generally we have two different kinds of brines. We have a 3% solution, which is 3% salt, the rest of it being water, so 0.5 ounces of salt for 16 fluid ounces of water. Or we have a 5% solution, which is a little more salty. The reason why we would use one over the other, depending on the kind of meat that we're using it for. If I were going to brine turkey, I would probably use a 3% solution, versus if I were going to brine something like corned beef, I would probably use a 5% solution. Those rules are not necessarily hard and fast, and they can be played with in some aspects. Probably one of the most unusual and difficult things for people to do is something called the standard breading procedure. It's really not complicated. The hard part is how to use a wet hand on one, a dry hand on the other, and not end up with two big cakey sausage fingers. The proper mise en place setup for a standard breading procedure is listed below. From left, product to be breaded, we've got flour, egg wash, breadcrumbs, and a pan to hold the breaded product. Use one hand for the liquid ingredients and the other hand for the dry ingredients. This is great in principle, but doesn't always work so well in execution. Something to consider whenever you're doing a standard breading procedure is which to do first. Do you put on the flour first, or do you put on the egg wash? Traditionally, the way you look at that is if the ingredient is dry to begin with, you want to moisten it before you do anything else. So you would start with the egg wash. If it is a wet ingredient, like a piece of chicken, we've got to dry it off, and we're going to start with the flour first. Now, just like Emerald Lagasse says, I don't know where you get your flour, but mine doesn't come seasoned. So technically what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to add a little bit of seasoning to my flour beforehand. This is generally going to consist of things such as salt, pepper, and maybe a touch of cayenne in there too. Just like the breading procedure, there is a proper procedure for battering as well. The mise en place set up for a standard battering procedure is listed below. From left, the product to be battered. We have flour, again, seasoned flour. We want to make sure that that is ready to go, seasoned with a little salt, pepper, maybe some cayenne. And then we show it with the floured product right there. We can do this ahead of time. What you can't do ahead of time is dip it in the batter. So let's say, for instance, these shrimp, I'm going to just give them a light dusting of flour first, and I'm going to hold on to them until I'm ready to batter. Now, right before I put them in the oil is when I'm going to batter. I'm going to dip them in my batter and go straight into the hot oil, and this is going to prevent any of the batter from getting spongy or sticky or gooey and not very good. It'll also prevent it from sloughing off. We want to make sure that batter sticks to it really nicely. Blanching and parboiling is an essential part of the cooking process for a lot of green vegetables and even other vegetables as well. Vegetables and other foods can be par-cooked by blanching or parboiling. This loosens the peel, it removes undesirable flavors, and softens firm foods, sets a color very important for green foods, shortens final cooking time as well. Blanching shorter than parboiling. When we think of this, when we blanch, it's very quickly. Green vegetables should only blanch for between 15 to 30 seconds. It's extraordinarily quick. But you also, with this, blanching and parboiling has a separate component to it as well. Blanch or parboil foods are then submerged in an ice bath to refresh, but this also stops the cooking process, which is a super important part of this process. We don't want to let it continue to cook, because if we don't stop that cooking, that immediate cooking process, if we don't immediately shut it down, the food is going to get overcooked, it's going to get mushy, and that bright green of those nice green vegetables will turn to a dark, muddled gray green, and it's not a very attractive look to it. So the second part of blanching and parboiling is shocking. We do this to ensure that the food safety, we also use this very quickly to cool things down. We want to make sure that we get it cooled down very rapidly to prevent any kind of bacteria growth, but also for the food itself, the integrity of the food. Cool to a temperature below 41 degrees before storing it in the refrigerator. Using ice and water, this is going to get it to 41 degrees rather quickly. An ice bath is equal parts of ice cubes and cold water. You want to make into a slurry. You don't want it more ice than water. You don't want it more water than ice. You want it pretty equally balanced. Ice and water chills the food more rapidly than a container of ice only. Add salt if you want to reduce the temperature of the water. This will actually bring the temperature of the water down a little further. But you have to be careful about this too, because it's also going to affect the saltiness of the food if you do that. You either add salt to the blanch or you add salt to the shock. You're not going to get as much saltiness in the shock than you would as the blanch. And then salt lowers the freezing point of that water. So if you do need to get it super cold super quickly, adding a little bit of salt to that will actually lower the temperature of the water quite a bit, anywhere between 5 to 10 degrees, and will allow you to be able to get that item down even further than below 41. But typically that's not necessary unless you're doing large batches. So let's summarize and talk about some of our key takeaways for today. Mise en place is more than just being physically prepared. It's also a state of mind. Prep lists should be specific and detailed, and organized by the most difficult items first. Par is the standard amount that should always be on hand. Weights and measures are used differently. An ounce is not always the same as a fluid ounce. Clarifying butter raises the smoke point and allows you to use it as a higher temperature. And breading And blanching and shocking should be done closer to the cooking time for maximum effect.